Love bears all things. The emotional wounds are raw. The family member has left and words were spoken that broke your heart. Is this you? This was my story from a few years ago. It is my hope that as you listen to my story, that you will get to understand something of what God is doing in our life. And God is in the business of reconciliation. He's in the business of restoring our family members, the ones that have gone and left and have spoken words that have, hurt our feelings and left raw wounds. But God is in the business of reconciliation. And today I'm going to share my story. My name is Margaret Harden, and I'm a mum, and I'm also a praying mum. And you might be a praying mother or a father or a grandparent who is praying for the restoration of a family member back into God's kingdom. So many of us have had children that have gone to Sunday school. They have gone to church services with us and whatnot. They've been taught in the ways of the Lord. And, this is the space where sometimes they've gone astray as they've gone into teenage years and adult years. They've chosen lifestyles that, have gone against some of the things you might have taught them. So this is not a guilt trip. This podcast is not a guilt trip for you to get back on your knees and to be praying more, fasting more. But this is to lift your gaze to the one who gave you life, who gave you healing and wholeness, so that you will also start to contend for your children and grandchildren to come back to faith again. I know, and I've got a story I want to tell you, and it is a story from my family. My dear beloved daughter. She's a very private person, so it is something that I have to be careful with because, private people don't like their details shared. But we had a conversation many years ago, and I probably was a little anxious because my daughter wouldn't talk to me much about God, so I didn't really know where she stood with salvation. And maybe I pushed it a little bit hard. And one day I shared a testimony of a healing that I'd seen online. And, I was excited because I love the healing stories. That's something that brings excitement and joy to me. And when I shared it with her, her response was entirely the opposite. And she shouted at me and said, "Don't ever share these things with me again. Don't talk to me about God." And I was devastated. I was really devastated because somewhere I had a memory of some snippet of conversation that I'd had with her where she'd said something that I thought she'd said of, "I'll get there in the end." And so unthinkingly, I just said it and blurted it out to her. I said, "But you promised me you'd get there in the end." And my daughter turned around and said, "I never promised that. You can't say that." And I was equally devastated. My excitement from a few moments before of wanting to share a testimony was popped like a balloon and lay flat on the ground. And, I got up from that moment and I went into prayer. And over the next few days, a few dear friends shared their testimonies of their adult children coming back to the Lord once they themselves were married and with children. And I thought, okay, Lord, that's something to look forward to. But a week later, and this is my testimony, a week later, as I went for a walk and I was praying to God about this situation, which was really occupying my mind and my thinking a lot, God reminded me. He reminded me of a beautiful promise. And it came actually because he said something to me that I've never forgotten. And it was, Margaret, you trusted your daughter's promise more than mine. And as soon as I heard that, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that that was true. I had taken my daughter's words, which she denied, as being more important than what God had said in his word, in his scriptures. So I immediately said, sorry, Lord, I did take my daughter's words at higher weight than what you had said to me. So in that moment, I asked the Holy Spirit to bring to mind a verse that was a promise that I had remembered many years ago, but I couldn't remember where it was in the Bible. And God is faithful. 3 times over the next 2 days, the same verse came up in different things. You know, it was at the end of a podcast. It was, I opened my Bible at my workplace and it came open at that page. And the third time was somebody spoke it. So there were 3 times when this verse was brought to mind over the next 48 hours. And I knew that the Holy Spirit was reminding me, this is the promise. This is the promise I have for you and for your children and for your grandchildren. So let me read it to you. It's from Psalm 103 and it's verse 17 and 18. I'm going to read it in 2 versions. I have the New King James Version, and then this is what it says in here. But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting to those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to such as keep his covenant, and to those who remember his commandments to do them. And this is what it is in the Passion Translation. But Lord, your endless love stretches from one eternity to the other, unbroken and unrelenting towards those who fear you and those who bow face down in awe before you. Your faithfulness to keep every gracious promise you've made passes from parents to children to grandchildren and beyond. I'd like you to take this as a promise from God for your children and your grandchildren. I know that when I read that, when my children were little, I thought of it as being my parents belonged to the Lord and followed Jesus. They were faithful in believing and walking with the Lord. And I, as a child, inherited some of this promise already, and that my children were the grandchildren of righteous parents. So I saw this for my children. But right now, I'm seeing it for my children and their children as well. So if this is you, and you are in this situation of contending and praying for your loved ones to return to the Lord, well then keep praying, keep being fervent in prayer, and hold this promise as a promise for yourself. And if this message has touched you and you'd like to hear more, please subscribe and I will continue sharing some of the other insights that I've come across in witnessing to my family members, or even respecting their requests for not witnessing, but still praying in the background. And though not every one of my family has come back yet, I want it to be a place where we encourage each other in the things of the Lord and in seeing God's goodness and God's promises come to light in today and in the days to come. Thank you for joining me.